they don't realize how harmful this can be for people. So it appears like they have the things they want and they live this dream life, but they don't feel good within themselves. Hello my loves, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Lorena, I'm a somatic self-concept and identity coach, and I support you in bridging the gap between who you currently are or see yourself as and who you desire to be or become. Welcome to part 3 of this series, Is the Manifestation Community a Cult? If you've not watched part 1 and 2, then you can find them linked below. In part 1, I defined what a cult is and how the whole process of this series is gonna go and why I am even doing this series. And in part 2, we started taking apart some of the characteristics of a cult and saw how they apply to the manifestation community. And we're going to continue to do that now in part 3. Let's dive into cult characteristic based on the framework by Michael Langone, number 3. Mind-altering practices such as meditation, chanting, speaking in tongues, denunciation sessions, and debilitating work routines are used in excess and serve to suppress doubts about the group and its leader. This is a very interesting one for me because not all mind-altering practices are bad, but when they are used in excess, they can be. And what is coming to mind here for me with regards to the manifestation community in particular is this weird trend that has become popular over the recent years where people affirm themselves into oblivion. This is also something that I have spoken out against a lot. And it's not because I think affirmations are bad as a technique, full stop. In fact, I do use them myself in specific contexts and in moderation. But when it gets excessive and when it's designed to support one of the points that we had in the last video, when it discourages question or doubt, it leads to emotional suppression. Very bad. This is something that I see a lot. And I think often this is not any ill intent from the person who's teaching it. I think most of the time they're just not trauma-informed or trauma-trained, and they don't realize how harmful this can be for people, depending on the experiences and the beliefs that they already have. And personally, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't really see affirmations or mind-altering practices being taught with the intent to suppress negative assumptions or perspectives towards the group or its leaders. I more see it as an excessive technique to suppress people's own doubts and beliefs and emotions so that they can change their beliefs, which according to the teachings then ultimately changes your reality or manifests what you want. So because of that, it may be well-meaning. It may be that the coach or influencer or content creator just wants their audience to change their beliefs. They just want to help them manifest what they want. And maybe for them, this mindless affirming has worked. Honestly, I think most people who do this technique of mindless affirming, and obviously I don't know everybody, I can't speak for everyone, but I would be very surprised if the people who are teaching this don't have some unprocessed trauma. Either they have worked on their trauma themselves or like with their own mentors or coaches, and they're not just doing this practice of mindless affirming on its own, or they have absolutely wired nervous system likely because they've not dealt with their own stuff. So they might have repressed emotions going on as well. So it appears like they have the things they want and they live this dream life, but they don't feel good within themselves. Just a gut feeling. I don't know. I can't speak for everyone, of course, but with what I know about life and trauma, trying to mindset your way out of pain doesn't work in the long run. And I've had a lot of clients who came to me absolutely traumatized with severe emotional suppression due to having spent months doing daily affirmations and thought flipping and essentially repressing their truth instead of actually working through it. Because if you're just putting beliefs on top of beliefs that you already have, if you're trying to just think your emotions, think your beliefs, think your trauma away, you will have a part in you that is resisting that new belief because it doesn't feel true to you. And then that part that is resisting that will actually get louder it will actually get more agitated. I've also heard from people who follow this technique that it just takes a lot of time. It's very time consuming to constantly do practices, be that excessive meditation or excessive mindset work. It's not that the practice as a whole is bad. In fact, it's so important to have a regular practice, to be consistent, but you still have to have a life. And practices are not the way to change your self-concept or your state of being. They're just practices. They're just support tools. I always say that when this becomes your status quo, when constant affirming becomes your normal, then your state has not changed towards having embodied whatever desire or self-concept you want to embody. You have just then embodied the self-concept of somebody who constantly says affirmations every day, or who constantly has to do a lot of mindset work in order to get what they want. Before you found manifestation, before you found spiritual teachings, you were also getting things you wanted. You were also living your life. You didn't have to affirm for things so they would come true. Okay, let's move on to the next point. The leadership dictates, sometimes in great detail, how members should think, act, and feel. For example, members must get permission to date, change jobs, marry. All leaders prescribe what types of clothes to wear, where to live, whether or not to have children, how to discipline children, and so forth. Now, as far as I know, these specific examples are not applicable to the manifestation community. However, what I just mentioned about encouraging people to control their own emotions, flip their thoughts, do all these practices, or not do certain things, that applies here. And an element of control that I've also heard of, yet not personally experienced, is that I've heard about coaches who this should be illegal. Honestly, maybe it is. Coaches who break confidentiality and just share client information. That's just, I don't even know what to say with like how wrong this is. Somebody's trusting you with their life, with their feelings, with their thoughts, their beliefs, with their story. It's not okay to share this, even with just a friend. Never ever. Big no. But as to not repeat myself with the emotional suppression part, because that is the core of what this point applies to or refers to with regards to the manifestation community, I will leave that here and move on to the next point, because I've already explained how it manifests and why it's harmful. So let's continue with the group is elitist, claiming a special, exalted status for itself, its leaders and its members. For example, the leaders considered the Messiah, a special being, an avatar, or the group or the leaders on a special mission to save humanity. Okay, let's take this one apart because there are a few layers to it in my perspective that do apply. So first of all, especially in the community around Neville Goddard, this man is often treated or perceived to be like a god. He's really being pedestaled. Like his teachings are portrayed as being the ultimate, and other spiritual teachings, even in the realm of manifestation, are wrong or haven't gotten it quite right. This is very cult-like thinking. A lot of cults have this message around, we know the truth, we are the enlightened ones, nobody else has gotten it right. And this goes back to the first point where I took this apart a bit more. Obviously, I've never met Neville Goddard. He died before I was even an idea. But from his lectures and from what I've heard, I never got the impression that he saw himself in that way. In fact, some of his concepts feel a bit dated based on the time when he taught, but largely he appears to me like he was a very compassionate, conscious, even awakened person. But I've seen a lot of people in the community pedestal his teachings and even shame teachings or teachers that don't align with his ideas. And they portray him as some sort of god. Speaking of God, the other layer or element to this is that in the manifestation community, especially the community around Neville Goddard, because it's a lot about personal responsibility, which is not a bad thing. I'm going to get to that point later in another one of our characteristics, but it's this you are God mentality. You create everything. You are the only one. You are God. Now, this is a message I hear frequently, and I've made videos on this topic before. I will link them somewhere as well, because this is another place where the core of the message isn't bad or even wrong, at least in my perspective. I do believe that we are all God. I do believe that we all have the divine within us. That is my personal belief. And therefore, I do see truth to this concept. We're human, but we're not just that. We are also consciousness, spirit, the divine personified. I mean, we are quite literally stardust. But all that being said, this perception or idea of you being God very quickly turns toxic and harmful when the ego isn't integrated. Because on a spiritual path, the ego will jump on freaking anything in order to create an identity, a self-concept around it. This is one of them. This is also something that I have spoken about extensively. In fact, a lot of the work that I do with my clients is about ego integration because we all have one. It's not bad, it's not wrong, but we need to have a healthy expression of it so it doesn't take over. And this you are God or I am God mentality that manifests so often in the spiritual community tends to come more from a spiritual ego, ultimately presenting as elitist thinking. Thinking that they are somehow the ones with the answers, or using manifestation as a tool to seemingly control other people or their behaviors, or at least attempt to do that. There is also this perception that's a bit us versus them, which I'll get into it in a moment anyway, which is that others don't have the truth. Others are still unconscious, and we know how the world really works. And this is a funny one because I fell into this when I started my journey and when I first came into this community, when I started diving into these teachings myself. That's what the ego does, right? You find something new and you want to go all in on it and you want to teach everyone. You feel elated by what you've learned. I've even experienced this when I first went vegan. I wanted to tell everybody, although that's not how you even support the vegan movement because people just get very resistant naturally and very defensive. And I remember when I was still very much part of this Neville Goddard community, and I shared about his teachings with somebody I spoke to who was also very spiritual, but not part of this community. And I felt like I was really teaching her something. I felt like I had the answers and she just didn't know. And I felt like I was giving this person a massive wake-up call and they're going to be like, wow, thank you for showing me this. I feel so enlightened from this. And I remember the feeling inside of me when I almost felt better than them. Like their spirituality was somehow less than mine. But you know what? It turned out this person knew all about Neville Goddard. They'd actually studied him extensively and just saw his teaching as one of many. Used some of the tools, but really didn't see it as the ultimate. And I remember at the time, this was many years ago, long before I was a coach even, that was such a wake-up call for me. And really made me question a lot of things and made me look inside and go, what am I even thinking here? Where's my ego at? So we're gonna move on to the next part where we'll dive into the us versus them mentality. So make sure you check in for part 4 and I'll see you next week.